Hello, and welcome to the Original Rushman Show. On this show, we will be taking an historical look into the mystical, magical, musical world of Rush, highlighting the career of Rush as seen through the eyes of a Rush fan of over 45 years. So join me on this journey by subscribing below, and maybe you will discover the Rush that I know. All right, thanks for joining me for this episode of the Original Rushman Show. Over my 45 years as an avid Rush fan, I have had a million questions I wanted to ask Rush about their career, knowing all along I would never get the chance to ask. But Geddy Lee recently released his memoirs called My Effin' Life, where I hope he answers most of my lifelong queries. Every year, my family will ask me what I want for Christmas, and I am so old that socks and underwear make me happy. But before you laugh, Tommy John underwear ain't cheap. This year, they haven't even bothered to ask me what I wanted for Christmas. I guess they're going to surprise me with a book. So Geddy is on his book tour, filling auditoriums, where he talks about his memoirs and reads portions of the books and takes questions at the end. And I thought we would watch portions of these events and give my thoughts on what we learned. You know, during the 70s, there was one singer, and only one singer, that the media had carte blanche to deride and make fun of in any way they wanted to, and that was Geddy Lee. I remember an interview in 1979 where this young female reporter said, "Some people," meaning her, "don't like your voice," speaking straight to Geddy Lee, and Geddy politely responded with how and why he sang the way he sang. But that wasn't good enough. She had to have a follow-up question where she said, "Well, how do you respond to those people who don't like your voice?" And Geddy simply said, "Don't listen to our music," and walked away. I thought it was a rude line of questioning, but this is how Geddy responds to those critics in his memoirs.
I'm torn because I have a few things I could read. I could read a story about the hijinks that happen sometimes in hotel rooms. Or I could read do something about my voice. What do you want to hear? Hijinks. Oh, voice. Okay. It's gonna be voice.
What about the robes, Geddy? The robes.
The absurdly prophetic robes? Okay, we'll get to that. Okay. I liked singing from a young age, and I wasn't insecure about it. I sang in a choir for a short time in public school, and later, when I did my bar mitzvah haftorah, I was told I had a beautiful voice. "You should be a cantor," my mom's friends would say. No thanks. At that point, I wasn't screaming like the damned howling in Hades, as my reputation would later have it. I would soon be singing cream songs and blues songs in a sort of tenor soprano, or, if you prefer, a soprano castrato style. I was a fan of guys with a higher range, like Steve Marriott in The Small Faces and Humble Pie. Humble Pie's Live at the Fillmore was a hugely influential record to me and most of my peers. I Don't Need No Doctor was a huge song to me, and you can hear its influence in my early singing in Rush. I would later often be compared to Robert Plant, and while he certainly pushed me into higher registers, I think a comparison with Marriott would be a bit more accurate. He had a soulful voice and a strong vibrato, but he rocked. And soon, John Anderson's mellifluous singing would affect me too. He had a high range, but his voice wasn't scratchy or abrasive. It was beautiful, soulful, and emotive, not unlike a schoolboy chorister. I really wanted to sing like that. Another singer who impressed me was Roger Hodgson on the early Supertramp records. And I also liked Paul Simon and Joni Mitchell a lot. Through the years, there were, of course, many others. I was a huge fan of Bjork later in life. It's her birthday today, by the way. But no one would think to make that connection. But there are certain words I sing in Rush in a very Bjork-like manner. But I'm not going to tell you what those are. You have to find them for yourself. I wasn't aiming for raspiness. I just responded intuitively, where my voice was out of necessity relating to what we were writing and the key we were writing it in. And when we were young, we weren't very savvy about keys. If the key we wrote a song in felt right, musically, I would just have to make it work. What we came to learn was that in certain lower registers, my voice lacked power. But when I booted up an octave, there was the power. Watching the movie Coda recently, I was struck by the scene in which the choir teacher tries to bring out his students' inner frustrations, coaxing her to sing from the gut. She's the only hearing member of a deaf family. Even if it's an ugly sound, he says, it will feel good. Turn your angst into power. And it dawned on me that my earliest vocal style may also have been rooted in my childhood. Listening to the stories of what my parents had endured in the concentration camps, suffering all that bullying and alienation so that when I began to sing, it all came rushing out like a screaming banshee. I was releasing all those suppressed emotions just by stepping up to the mic and screaming, "Yeah! Oh, yeah!" Of course, then I had to learn how to actually sing. John Griffin once wrote in the Montreal Gazette that I sounded like a guinea pig with an amphetamine habit. In Circus, Dan Newger said, if Lee's voice were any higher and raspier, his audience would consist exclusively of dogs and extraterrestrials. I kind of like that. And in 1979, perhaps kindlier, John Rockwell would comment in the New York Times, Mr. Lee sings in a spare but unusual way, a brittle and androgynous tenor. Okay. So yes, my style may come across to some as quite abrasive, especially before we began making records, but you have to put yourself back in 1974. It's all context, right? Here we are in 2023, and our collective ears have become much more open. We've heard every style of music, every kind of singer. Bands way heavier than Rush, vocalists even shriekier than I used to be. So imagine you're a critic back then, sitting in a reverberant arena, and there's this three-piece band you don't know, and this hairy guy is shouting at you. I get that if you consider yourself more sophisticated than the average music fan, our 26 minutes on stage must have seemed a loud mess. But we were truly into it, playing our parts with honest conviction, and, raw or not, we were connecting with a growing number of people. Thankfully, I guess sometimes the official tastemakers are the last to know. Each new Rush album gave me another opportunity to improve as a player and a songwriter, but especially as a singer. It's likely become so important to me because of all the heat I took for my voice over the years. But sometimes my attitude was like, hey, you don't like the way I sing? Well then, I politely invite you to fuck the fuck off.
You know, 45 years of watching Geddy Lee or reading articles about Geddy Lee now and going to 25 concerts, not one time did I hear them say the word fuck. Not one time did I even Hardly ever did I even hear them cuss. They were always so nice and so polite. I didn't even know if they talked like that in private. They were so conscious of being nice and respectful that they never said that to anybody to their face back in the 70s anyway.
Something more suitable to your sensitive taste. But most often, to meet my own standards, if no one else's, I worked on it, and I worked hard. And then there's singing with a cold. There is really nothing worse than going out on stage in that condition, becoming hoarse, singing badly, unable to hit the notes, and I did it far too many times. And it's a special kind of torture. With the show must go on attitude we had, we resisted canceling unless it was absolutely unavoidable. I went on stage with tonsillitis, croup coughs, even a bloody nose, swallowing blood throughout the show. And with this nose, that's a lot of blood. I was feeding a spittoon throughout the entire show. And when I was sick, my bass tech Scully would keep a shit ton of Kleenex in a wastebasket at the side of the stage and run out between songs with hot tea, lemon, and honey. One time, my ears became so congested that my trusty ENT doctor in Toronto had to puncture one of my eardrums to drain the fluid out, simply so I could fly to the next gig. When you're flying on tour, the decompression at altitude, you know this because you're a pilot, the decompression at altitude, the fluid in your sinus cavities can become excruciatingly painful and leave you partially deaf for days, and that's a whole lot of fun. So here I was, needle goes in, I screamed bloody murder. Then, when I was leaving his office, I noticed a young kid in the waiting room, pale as a ghost, staring at me in horror. And I said with a wink, "You're up, kid." Thank you.
Well, I never understood exactly what everybody was so, maybe however Geddy was singing was hurting their ears or their sensibilities, or it was just too far out of the box for them to accept. But I loved Geddy Lee's voice from the second I heard it on 2112. Burst in there with, "We've taken care of everything, the words you read, the songs you sing." I've loved Geddy's voice from that moment on, and I had friends that I loved Geddy so much that they go, "Man, Geddy could sing the alphabet and you would think it was great." And I said, most likely, because no matter what song that Geddy Lee sings, I like it because I like his voice so much. You know, when Neil Peart retired in 2015, retired from music completely, I was 100% certain that Rush was never going to tour as Rush again. I didn't think it was possible for Geddy and Alex to get out on the stage and pretend that they were Rush without Neil Peart being behind the drum kit. And then Neil passed away. And I thought that put the nail in the coffin. And then Taylor Hawkins passed away. And Geddy and Alex got out on, played with 4 different drummers, 4 different songs in Los Angeles and in London. And apparently they crossed paths with Paul McCartney. And rumors started abounding that maybe they could do this. Maybe they could go back out on tour with another drummer. And there's a lot of great drummers out there. And for the first time in, what is it, 8 years, I have hope. If timing, I know Alex just had stomach surgery not too long ago that he's recovering from, and Geddy's got his book tour. Now, the timing's not quite there yet. And then they got to find a drummer who is the timing's working for them, and then whether or not they're going to work together and put out a new Rush album and tour behind that, I don't know. But I was pretty much thinking that maybe they would have a small tour just to get a feel for whoever they chose to be the drummer, just to see, work together and see how that all worked out. And maybe they'd come back off of a small tour and write an album. I know they've got a lot of material, and if they write an album, then they're going to support that album. And so who knows? Maybe someday we will get to see another Rush album. I mean, another Rush tour with some other drummer. But this was an interview where they talked about Paul McCartney, and Paul McCartney may be very instrumental in getting these guys back out on the road. So let's take a listen to this right quick.
Tell us about the Taylor Hawkins tribute last year, because it looked and sounded amazing. What are your sort of fondest memories about that?
Oh, that was a very special gig for a lot of reasons. Obviously, it's sad because of losing Taylor and how much he meant, of course, to Dave. Dave Grohl and him were besties. You know, it's like me and Alex. You know, they were besties, and that hit Dave pretty hard. But Dave is like a superhuman, and he called me out of the blue. You know, I had written to him after Taylor passed away and gave, you know, extended my sympathies, of course. And Taylor had just sent me a note like 2 weeks before he passed away, just checking in on me. And that was really the kind of guy Taylor was, you know. He was always bugging me to get out back on stage and play. So anyway, so Dave calls me and he said, "Look, I'm going to do this this tribute, and of course, you know, you were one of Taylor's favorite bands. So would you consider reforming for that show?" And I said yes immediately, of course. And he was very considerate. And he said, "Look, I don't think you should play with one drummer, because then everyone's going to say that's the new Rush. So play with at least two."
Yeah.
I said, "Okay, I'll make you a deal. We'll play with two drummers, but you have to be one of them." And of course, he was thrilled to do it. So then came the gig, but even before that, you know, Alex and I were like a fish out of water. We hadn't played in 7 years on the stage. I hadn't played those songs in 7 years, aside from the one cameo we did on the South Park 25th
Right.
anniversary.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's so amazing and generous, and he grabbed Omar Hakim, hopped on a plane, and flew to Toronto. And
Whoa.
we had organized these rehearsals in Toronto, and we did 2 days of rehearsals just to make us comfortable, just to make us feel like this is a doable thing. And then when we got to London, he had set everybody up in this hotel room, and really it was like summer camp for rock musicians. Everybody communed with everybody, and it's the only gig I think I've ever done that had multiple musicians and multiple big name musicians that had no sense of competitiveness. There was no ego. Everybody was so welcoming and supportive to every other musician that it was really one of the greatest memories of my entire life. And the show, and of course, Dave Superman played with almost every band, and he was sleeping 3 hours a night.
Wow.
We got to connect with all these people we hadn't met. I got to meet Paul McCartney, and he was so lovely and inspiring and encouraging. After the gig, we had a little group of us, Josh Homme, Alex, me, and Dave would come in every once in a while so I could pour him a glass of wine. And and Will Forte was there, and Luke Spiller, and Paul came and sat with us. And he had loved our set, which meant a lot to hear from someone of that stature. But he was insisting that we had to go out on the road, and he was making a plea. And I remember him saying to me, "You know what Ringo says? It's what we do." And I said, "Okay,
Pretty good Liverpudlian there, Geddy.
yeah." I said, "You convince Alex that we're in." So he went to work on Alex. But so for all the sadness of what we were celebrating, it was a beautiful event, and one that really helped Alex and I realize that these were our songs. We have nothing to be ashamed of to go out and play them with another drummer, or if we would ever decide to do that again. And that was great to reclaim sort of ownership of our legacy in that regard. So, and I think Dave understood all that, and that's what makes me particularly grateful to him.
Through the years, when I would hear rumors about Rush doing this, doing that, new album coming out, um, I always waited till I got official word that something was happening, because you just never know where some of this information is coming from, and unless I heard it from the mouth of a member of Rush, then it was just a rumor. And until I hear Geddy Lee or Alex announcing that they've decided to go with Chad Smith or Mike Portnoy or Danny Carey or whoever they come to agreement with, and that they're actually going to go on tour, then it's not going to happen. And so we hope that's going to happen for especially all these new young, young and old, new Rush fans over the last 10 years that became introduced to Rush through one way or another after they'd retired from playing and regretted heavily not ever seeing them play. I hope that Rush goes out on tour at least one more time, giving all these people one last opportunity to see Rush live in concert, because there is no concert ever that as fulfilling as a Rush concert. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of the Original Rushman Show. But before you go, don't forget to hit that like, subscribe, and make a comment. Thanks for watching.